So a very warm welcome from an unseasonably warm Cape Town to each of you dialing in today. My name is Nico Katzke, Head of Portfolio Solutions at Satrix, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this, our 11th installment of the IndexMore series. Together with our partners, BlackRock's iShares, we aim to offer thought leadership on everything indexing and more. So if I can just give a few more seconds for all of our attendees to arrive. We have a healthy 610 people registered for this event, so fantastic turnout, and we welcome each and every one of you. We have an esteemed panel of experts to talk to us, so really looking forward to this session. Now, in the past, we have covered diverse topics, including investing in China, responsible investing, and ESG trends, as well as global infrastructure investing, to name but a few. Today, we will be talking about thematic investment opportunities more broadly and how these strategies are designed and what their purpose would be in your investment portfolio. So certainly a very topical subject that we're addressing today. Now, the current macroeconomic environment has given investors much to contemplate. With rising inflation globally, and yes, that's not just in your checkers trolley, coupled with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, sharply rising interest rates, oil and gas prices, food shortages, and of course the ever-present climate challenges that we face, one might very well be forgiven for feeling a bit extra cautious about allocating your hard-earned capital to volatile equity markets. Indeed, market indices from the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, Nikkei, and also, of course, our own all-share index have all been hit hard this year by the malaise experienced globally. But as the adage goes, one man's calamity is another man's opportunity. And so we believe now more than ever, investors have the opportunity to build exposure to long-term focused investment trends. So working with iShares, we at Satrix have built a suite of thematic ETFs trading on the JSE in rands that offer local investors an easily accessible and low-fee rand hedge through products that offer unique sources of diversification. While certainly there remains risk to further equity market pain, certain themes will likely remain present and persistent well into the unknown future. So to this end, BlackRock has identified several such long-term themes that will likely remain with us going forward. So these include ever-present climate challenges, changing demographics as populations age, technological advances and breakthroughs, the shifting of economic powers to the east, as well as the increasing pace of urbanization globally. Now, these themes certainly are not temporary, but rather long-term indicators of permanently changing demographics. Now, the impact that these structural shifts will have on capital markets will likely provide longer-term opportunities for certain types of companies. Now, BlackRock's range of thematic investment funds, which we track using our locally listed feeder ETFs, offer an easy way for local investors and intermediaries like yourselves to hold global companies that are in prime position to benefit from these seemingly inevitable megatrends so identified by BlackRock. Now, the thematic range we offer through our feeder ETFs also offer great diversification to equity markets more broadly. And as our panelists can see, in South Africa, we have something called load shedding, which just happened. I assume we are still connected to the internet, but we just went dark momentarily. So those of you at home, we hope you are still dialed in. Now, these feeder ETFs also offer great diversification to equity markets more broadly, as are comparatively uncorrelated to other well-known global indices, like, for example, the MSCI All Country World Index or the S&P 500. Now, the companies within our range of thematic investments are spread across sectors and geographies, and crucially, their payoffs tend to be less affected by prevailing business cycles. Simply put, people age and require healthcare spending, irrespective of whether we are experiencing an economic downturn or not. Now, at Satrix, we have introduced two new thematic ETFs in the last month that we are very excited to bring to the market. The first theme is our Satrix Healthcare Innovation ETF, which launched in May. Now, this offers access to global companies that are leading the rapidly evolving global medical innovation sector. The second theme is our Satrix Smart City Infrastructure ETF. Now, you may have noticed the IPO opened this morning. Now, this new ETF offers investors diversified exposure to the global companies that best benefit from providing services necessary for the development and efficient running of cities in a sustainable manner. Now, the over 170 global companies included provide services related to resource use efficiency, such as water recycling, urban connectivity, and human well-being development. Now, remarkably, access to these two feeder ETFs that I just mentioned cost local investors a total expense ratio of just 0.6% per annum. And so they're not only compelling from a diversified global exposure perspective, but also offer a highly cost-effective alternative for those local investors looking for offshore exposure. Now, the purpose of today's IndexMore session is to give you a very real sense of the work that your investments are actually funding. We deviate somewhat from past webinars by, instead of hearing from portfolio managers, we introduce you to the real people managing real companies that our feeder ETFs are invested in. Specifically, we are joined by the president of a leading US-based water technologies company listed on the New York Stock Exchange, all the way from the US, and also a senior director at a leading healthcare innovation and research firm with over 6,000 employees based in the Netherlands, all the way from Germany. But before I do that, let's first ask you to join in the discussion by answering the following poll question. Now, you should start to see the poll appear on your screens. So if you can make a selection from the options that you see there, you will see let me just see. Yes, the poll is there. How would you qualify your equity portfolio positioning going into Q2? Of course, the first person to give the correct answer wins a prize. I am only joking. There is no correct answer. But as I see, the answers are being tallied. Now, please note, as we're waiting for all of you to submit your answers, please note you're also invited to pose questions to our panelists by clicking on the message bar on your screen throughout the session, and we will hopefully get at answering those questions at the end of our presentations. So it seems, so we're almost there, 70% participation. If you can maybe quickly get your answer through. There's no pressure. There's no correct answer, of course. But it seems like the majority of you are saying that you're aggressive and sticking to it, keeping a long-term view. And only a few of you are mentioning a sort of more defensive stance, which is quite interesting. Now, before we get to our company representatives, let's first invite Omar Moufti. So that's our product specialist within the iShares EMEA product team at BlackRock to discuss thematic investments with us more broadly. So generally, most of you have indicated that you are more aggressive and sticking to your long-term views. So with that in mind, welcome, Omar, and thank you for your time, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Nico. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
So, Omar, thematic investing has seen strong uptake globally, but this has not happened without some pushback from indexation purists arguing for using only simple vanilla market indices, like, for example, the S&P 500. Some have also asked whether companies can reliably be classified within distinct groups. For example, if you look at Volkswagen, I mean, their financing arm has grown so significantly in recent years that it almost looks more like a large bank with a side hustle selling cars. So how do you classify a company like Volkswagen even? So in response, can you share some of the nuances with us behind constructing these mega trend indices? And also touch on how you at BlackRock view the opportunities behind thematic investing, and specifically whether you believe it offers long-term value and diversification to our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the first time I've heard Volkswagen's auto businesses being described as a side hustle, but that's a great characterization. So yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of index purists out there, but the idea of thematics is to be forward-looking, not just investing where the index is right now, which is in fact a reflection of many years of themes that have grown over time and gained greater share of the of the index weighting, but also where the index is going towards in the future. So we're not looking just at short-term cycles, but really long-term structural drivers of change, trying to access the disruption and really access that acquis of the future. And how we go about that, and then maybe how we define thematics at BlackRock. First of all, we want these themes to be accessing those megatrends. And you mentioned them in the intro. We define the 5 key megatrends as being climate change, resource scarcity, urbanization, social and demographic changes, shifting centers of economic power, and that accelerated technological innovation and adoption. So really that megatrend orientation is very important for the long term and for portfolio construction. Now, the second aspect is an unconstrained approach. Those megatrends are very much global in nature, so we don't see any reason for thematics to be constrained by the traditional asset allocation grid of sectors and regions. We really think that sometimes the companies that are winners from these megatrends are going to be European companies. Sometimes they'll be American or U.S. companies. Sometimes even emerging market companies. So it makes sense to take this global approach to the global and unconstrained approach to each theme. And ultimately, the goal really is on long-term outperformance. The idea is that this alignment between companies, themes, and megatrends, and the structural tailwind will help these companies grow faster than the rest of the market. And just as important for that long-term outperformance, they will grow longer than the market participants tend to discount. Now, you asked about how we define these themes. The fact is that traditionally, we only had a handful of data sets by which to define companies. We all know the GICS sector classifications. We know that there are country classifications, but we find that those really don't get to the core, to the essence of what companies are. And now we are able to use highly granular data sets to really capture the essence of each theme. And one of those key data sets is revenue breakdowns, where it isn't just about the broad taxonomy of a company, but really understanding the DNA of these companies. Where do they achieve where do they generate their revenue across what are now more diversified revenue streams globally?
So that's fascinating, Omar. Now, before we get to the next question that I want to pose to you, let's first get a sense from the audience whether you are currently holding any thematic investment strategies already. And if so, how are you integrating these into your portfolio? So we should again see a second poll appear on your screen soon. And please answer it accordingly again. Select which of the answers apply to you. So the question is, are you and your clients investing thematically? If so, how have you integrated thematics? And again, thematics just refers to theme-based indices or thematic indexation, which is investing according to a specific theme. So the numbers are ticking in fast. Again, no right or wrong, just what applies to you. So our poll results look quite interesting. About half is saying no, but considering, and about 15% is saying no and not planning to in the future. So for that 16%, we hope to convince you otherwise to at least consider thematic indexation as part of your portfolio. So that's about the results that we see, Omar. Is that quite a few of our attendees are saying no, but considering, about half. And about only 16% are considering no and not planning to in the future. So I would call that quite a majority are either considering it or have already bought into thematic investments. So Omar, I'm curious whether the results from this poll corresponds to what you're seeing at BlackRock, and whether you're seeing that investors are allocating to thematics. And is there a demand globally? And if so, in which areas are you seeing the most traction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we were to run this analysis with a European client base and or American one, in fact, we would see obviously much more on the yes side and a mix between those four categories, between satellite, global equity, thematic sleeve, or increasingly, this is still the smallest portion, is putting thematics at the core. So thematics have been really possibly the fastest growing asset class in the equity market over the past 3-4 years. And we're seeing a lot of client demand, and it's really impacting how investors construct their portfolios and are placing more emphasis on these long-term megatrends. So if we look back just a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, much of it in terms of thematic exposure was in the satellite portion or as part of that global equity bucket, with maybe you could call it asset allocators ceding to grassroots client demand for thematic exposures that are more intelligible, more intuitive than your traditional products. But increasingly, the narrative has shifted towards the core, and asset allocators are now putting thematics at the center of portfolio construction and saying, like, this is how we see the future. These are the big megatrends, and this is how we're going to access it via these long-term thematics. And that resonates both from a performance perspective and with clients on an intellectual level, which is very important because the better the clients understand the portfolios, they're more likely to be invested. And we know that time in the market is very important for the long run for all our retirements, really. And maybe one more reason for the shift towards the core has been the rise of sustainability. You know, thematic indices are generally ESG integrated in terms of index methodology, but maybe more importantly, they tend to align with UN Sustainable Development Goals that the world seeks to achieve by 2030. So more investors are looking to align their portfolios with these UN SDGs from first maybe an optics perspective or the client need perspective, but also because, you know, wanting to advance these UN SDGs, acknowledging the role of capital markets in how resources are allocated. But finally, you know, I mentioned this a number of times, for that performance side to be aligned with where global needs are for the long term. So I'm glad to see we have an untapped market in South Africa.
Right. So, Omar, I like what you're saying, because I think all the more it's becoming clear that investors want to know how their rand or their dollar or the euro are being invested. And so thematic indexation allows transparency in terms of how how your money is being managed. And that consistency and transparency is prized highly, certainly by a growing number of investors. But I want to bring us back to the first of Satrix's recently launched thematic ETFs. What exactly are some of the drivers of healthcare innovation specifically that makes this a worthwhile investment strategy for longer-term investors from your perspective?
I think healthcare innovation, we can speak about it particularly aligning to the demographic megatrend, to that shifting center of economic power megatrend, and to the technological adoption and innovation megatrend, of course. So from a demographic perspective, I think we're all well aware of the global aging phenomenon. It's one of the most inescapable trends out there. So it's estimated that by 2050, 20% of the world's population will be over 65. The over 65s are, in fact, the fastest growing demographic cohort globally, really outpacing millennials, young adults, and the adult population there. So obviously from these figures, this isn't just a developed market trend. You know, we're well aware of the situation of Japan or Europe and even China, but it is something that's across the board impacting EM just as drastically as DM. And even in South Africa, I was just looking up the figures, we're seeing dramatic growth expected in the elderly population. Now, that's maybe from that demographic perspective. Looking at the shifting center of economic power, EM has emerged from a life expectancy perspective. Life expectancy across the globe has really converged over the last 30 years. And that means that as the world ages, ailments are very different. We've solved for most of the endemic infectious diseases, even the most recent ones. And we now need to address ailments linked to longevity. So that's living a healthier, a longer life, but a healthier one physically and also cognitively. And so what we're seeing across the globe is healthcare spending outpacing GDP growth. And this aligns, I mentioned SDGs earlier, this aligns nicely with the third UN Sustainable Development Goal, which is good health and well-being. And that's really the long-term opportunity backdrop for healthcare innovation.
That's awesome. But I'm also curious, Omar, before I let you go, just to explain to us how healthcare innovation specifically differs from traditional healthcare or the big pharma type companies that are well established and might not have that good upside potential that a healthcare innovation ETF specifically offers.
Yeah, absolutely. So the traditional healthcare space is very big pharma dominated. And there's definitely a lot of innovation going on there, but that isn't always reflected in returns because those big pharmaceutical companies are, they act relatively defensively, and they're also, you could say, running to stand still or innovating to stand still. They are big pharma because they have a very large pool of drug patents that are progressively going off patent and need to be renewed. And in fact, oftentimes they will renew that through their internal innovation, but a lot of times they will look to outsource that or acquire that from some of the more nimbler players in this space. So healthcare innovation is really oriented on those long-term areas of growth. So that's the biotech industry across what we believe are the big areas of growth of ailments that need to be treated. That's oncology, neurology, cardiology, immunotherapies, and even modern viral biopharmaceuticals. There's also the equipment space. We need more surgical devices and implants. We're seeing a shift towards robotic surgery. Medical imaging is very important, diagnostics and genetic sequencing, as we'll see. And finally, we're really looking within healthcare innovation at the whole healthcare ecosystem and the services that are required for that innovation. So that's how we produce drugs, how we test them, and how we digitalize patient data. It's quite a comprehensive ecosystem approach to that innovation within healthcare.
Brilliant. That's so interesting. Thanks, Omar. Now, to make the healthcare innovation theme that we've been discussing more practical, let's look at one of the companies that you'll be invested in through our healthcare innovation feeder ETF. So for this, we are joined on the proverbial stage by Phoebe Lowe, all the way from Germany, to tell us more about the Dutch-based firm QIAGEN. And please forgive me, Phoebe, if I butchered the pronunciation, where she is the Senior Director of Investor Relations. Now, Phoebe, welcome, and kindly share with our clients some insights into your business specifically and the research and development that you are involved in at QIAGEN.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here and for the introduction. Certainly, QIAGEN is at a great time right now with, COVID just happening. There's been an awareness of molecular testing and how it can benefit the healthcare industry. Our company is a global mid-cap company listed on New York Stock Exchange and also in the DAX index on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. And we're a premium brand of laboratory instruments and consumables for a pretty wide range of applications, all the way from research to clinical testing. So our sales are pretty well balanced on these markets, 50% life sciences, which is more like discovery research, academic research, pharma research, and also some applied testing where, we do human identification forensics business. And then another 50% is in what we call molecular diagnostics, which is clinical testing. And that for us, it means testing in oncology, infectious diseases, and immune response testing. So we have a pretty nicely diversified global presence with direct sales in the major markets and industrialized markets, and distribution partners around the globe in other areas. About 14% of our sales are coming from emerging markets in 2021, at least. It's usually 14-15%. And then our business model is really selling consumables. We sell instruments in order to automate our consumables. So instruments are sold, but it's a smaller portion of our business. So it's nice that our revenues are really based on high margin, highly reoccurring consumables business. That covers, as I said, a wide range of applications.
So Omar mentioned earlier oncology, and you mentioned it yourself now as well. Now, this always brings, in my mind, immediately up the topic of chemotherapy treatments. Now, can you tell us a bit more about how oncology and diagnostic testing innovation have changed the identification and the treatment of cancer conditions from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. And it's nice you bring up cancer because while COVID brought a lot of visibility to molecular testing on an infectious diseases category, molecular testing has been around for a while and really impacting the oncology, diagnostics and therapy capabilities for quite a while. You say chemotherapy, that's like hitting a nail with a sledgehammer compared to the personalized medicine capabilities that molecular diagnostics allows. So molecular diagnostics really gives you more finely tuned information to enable better therapy. For example, and in diagnosis also, formerly you would say you have lung cancer, you would need to take a tissue biopsy. So you'd have a really invasive procedure to go in and take some tissue cells from your lungs and then do some histology analysis, which is mostly visual analysis on the type of cells that are present. So nowadays for lung cancer, there's something called liquid biopsy, which is basically just taking a blood sample and detecting if there are any DNA from the tumor floating around in the patient's blood. So you can have tumor of origin, so locational information. You can have type of tumor. You can also get information from the patient's blood on how they would respond to certain therapy choices. So personalized medicine these days allows much more targeted treatment. So one of our programs is called Companion Diagnostics, where we partner with pharma partners, Novartis, AstraZeneca, all these big pharma partners that are developing these oncology drugs. And we design a qualification assay for patients so that they can take the test, the assay, and then it will tell the clinicians, or the oncologist, will they respond to this drug or this drug, and what's the best treatment for them. It also allows treatment monitoring. So during therapeutic treatment, you can take certain samples at various stages and milestones to compare to a baseline sample, and you get information early enough to really change the outcome of the therapy, change the course of outcome, not just wait and see what works and doesn't, but have an indication before you see symptomatic results to help you guide the clinicians guide their decisions. And then also, there's a fair amount of data processing workload that needs to happen when you do even deeper analysis like sequencing. We've all heard of next generation sequencing if you really dive into the biotech industry. And that's really taking information and making it actionable. So it's software programs that connect the information to all of the treatment therapies out there that are available. So a clinician can look at a report and say, my patient has this mutation. Patients with this mutation have historically been known to respond to these therapies. There are these clinical trials going on that my patient could be part of if they wanted to try a new drug. So it really gives actionable data behind a lot of these tests that were a bit cumbersome in the past to figure out. So it's really changed the effectiveness of oncology treatment, and then we could say the same also for infectious diseases and immune testing as well.
Fascinating. So if I can pivot slightly, so we've been through a disastrous global health event with the COVID pandemic. I'm curious as to whether and how QIAGEN reacted and adapted to this sudden global shift in focus. Did you pivot some of your own research efforts, or were you mostly unaffected by this change in focus?
Yeah, it's a good question because we have had an interesting history during COVID, actually. We had a bid for full acquisition by a conglomerate in the U.S., Thermo Fisher, and that happened right before COVID, and then COVID hit, and our investors really thought we were worth more than what they had bid pre-COVID. So definitely COVID affected our business. That being said, even now, still 65% of our business is non-COVID related. So it's not our entire business. So when COVID started, our, infectious disease testing was a focus for us already. We actually had, I would say about $150 million of revenues in products that eventually were used for COVID testing. So when you saw COVID come out and the US CDC workflow went out, it had all QIAGEN products in the front end of the workflow. And that was interesting because we couldn't keep up with the demand. We actually had to call them and have meetings with them and say, you've got to add other suppliers to your specification list because we can't supply everything. So we were happy actually to have some of our competitors in that group with us. So we already had a pretty big portfolio that was applicable to COVID testing, but certainly there was a lot of demand or need for new solutions. So how can they ramp up testing faster? How can they automate? How can they make these large volumes that are going through centralized testing labs happen? And for example, one of the things that we did was launched a completely new solution, which is, it's called QIAprep and AMP. It's basically, whenever you do a molecular analysis, you have to extract the RNA, DNA that you're looking at, and then you test for a target. So those are usually, in sequence, a couple different steps. We developed this QIAprep and AMP that did everything in one tube in one step. So it rapidly sped up the process and made it scalable on a large scale. So things like that are what we focused on during COVID. We also launched had a rapid development such as a T-cell test for immune testing to see how well your body is responding to the vaccines. We also have a completely new application that came out during COVID, was testing wastewater runoff for traces of COVID. So that was an absolutely new type of test that we also developed and sold. We have a contract with U.S. public labs for all of their public labs to do wastewater testing for COVID. So there were a lot of new applications that came up, and certainly navigating these changing regulatory timelines with the FDA being overloaded, with new competition coming out. A lot of companies came out of the woodwork with COVID tests, for example. And then also seeing how that is going to change as we move forward. As COVID becomes an endemic, how is that COVID testing blending in with the testing landscape that was already being done for flu, for example? Now there are what they call fourplex tests, which test for four things: the two influenzas, AB, RSV, and COVID together. So trying to navigate the changing dynamic environment is also what has kept us busy in the last couple of years.
That's fascinating. So our Healthcare Innovation Feeder ETF is designed specifically around innovation, as the name suggests. Now, you've mentioned a few new areas of research, but I'm curious what areas of innovation you're currently pursuing and whether any of your efforts are aimed at emerging markets specifically. So whether anything is relevant to us in South Africa or emerging markets more generally.
Yeah, it's great you asked, because we actually have we're increasing our focus on public health. We have a really, a large franchise within our company is for latent TB testing. And one of our levers in sustainability is also access to healthcare. I mean, it's interesting when you look at, the ESG trend that's going on right now. We will never be a poster child for plastic waste, for example, because we sell IVD products, which by nature have to be disposable. But where we can really have a lever is getting healthcare modern testing into some of the emerging markets. So for an example of that is we just launched a device late last year that is a battery operated device. It needs no computer, it needs no continuous power source. The cartridges for each test that go into it have reagents in it that are freeze dried. They don't need a cold chain. So it really works in the field without a laboratory infrastructure. And when you're testing blood, for example, that can be sensitive and usually needs a lot of laboratory equipment. That's a pretty big deal. So for us, it's not only coming up with the technology, which is groundbreaking, but also how do we get that technology into these areas that need it? So there's a lot of public health work working with these national entities to change their recommendations and testing programs, their nationally funded testing programs. We work, for example, with the Stop TB campaign. We work with the WHO and the Global Fund to make sure that these products are available in public programs or those who have qualified for the Global Fund or Unitaid resources. So it's a mix between innovation with coming up with the tech, and then the second half of that is making sure that that tech is available in the areas that need it the most.
Well, many thanks for your time and insights, Phoebe. I'm sure I'm not alone in wishing you and your colleagues at QIAGEN. I apologize for getting that wrong the whole time.
It's okay. Depends on what part of the world you're in, how you say it. So it's all right.
Look, in South Africa, we'd probably say QIAGEN. So
okay. In the US, they say QIAGEN. In Germany, it's QIAGEN. So, however you like.
But we wish you and your colleagues all the best with your research and endeavors in improving the health and well-being of future generations. I mean, certainly there can be no, sort of nobler investment for our clients as well. And just to remind you that investing in QIAGEN is one of the companies within our healthcare innovation feeder ETF that we launched in May. So certainly having that knowledge that your invested rand actually goes to owning a part of these companies that do such great work is something to be proud of as well. I want us to pivot our discussion slightly to the other thematic investment fund that I mentioned at the start. So this morning, Satrix's Smart City Infrastructure Feeder ETF opened its IPO, and investors may be curious as to how companies are actually selected, specifically for their positioning to benefit from global urbanization trends. So Omar, if I can ask you to return back to the stage, please. How do we define smart city infrastructure? And specifically, Omar, how are companies selected within this theme?
Yep, absolutely. I think smart city infrastructure is perhaps a less intuitive theme, or maybe it conjures up images of flying cars and retinal scans, but that could be its future, or part of it. But today, smart city infrastructure is really about the range of services, technology, and equipment aimed at improving urban quality of life and the efficiency of cities. Because cities are great places to live, especially economically. They allow us to network and to develop a virtuous circle of growth. But there's a lot to be done still to make it better. On the productivity side, there's a lot to be done about congestion, traffic. I think in Paris, your average driver loses 10 days a year stuck in traffic. There's a lot to be done on material waste. Your average developed market person produces about half a ton of waste every year. How do we deal with that? And there's also health risk. Carbon cities are very carbon intensive, very CO2 emissive perhaps, and that causes many health risks and even premature deaths. So we need to make all of this more efficient. And so it's a very holistic theme that covers everything from that connectivity side that I mentioned, about shared mobility, but also digital connectivity, so 5G, the Internet of Things. There's resource efficiency. That's energy management, that's water management, that's waste management, and sensor technologies to activate all of these. And there's also that aspect of urban design, building equipment and consulting and engineering services. So how do we define these? So we started, it starts really from the 5 UN SDGs that are key to this theme. That is clean water, affordable energy, industry innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities, and responsible consumption. From those 5 UN SDGs, and using that very granular revenue-based data set that you asked about, Nico, earlier, and we have over 1,400 different categories in terms of revenue breakdowns, finding the key 40 to 60 that are linked to those 5 UN SDGs and mapping out the companies that derive most of their revenues from these. So that means mapping out ultimately the companies that are linked to these 5 UN SDGs and that are linked to smart city infrastructure and improving quality of life in the urban environment.
That's awesome. So I've one thought, Omar. I mean, historically, we've viewed infrastructure spending needs to be mostly concentrated in underdeveloped regions. But I'm seeing that much of the constituents in these infrastructure-aligned thematic investment funds are allocated actually to developed markets. Now, how do we explain this, Omar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think traditionally when we think about infrastructure, or at least the infrastructure growth angle, that's very much tied to bringing new infrastructure to emerging markets and the growth of emerging markets. But actually, what we're seeing today is that there is a global need for infrastructure. And it's no accident that, we at BlackRock are basically trying to monitor and see how these themes develop. And when we think there's an opportunity, looking to access them thematically. So in the West, we're seeing that infrastructure is aging. Much of it is over 50 years old, and we need to adapt the current range of infrastructure to this new focus on sustainability, on reducing pollution, whether it's air, water, or waste, and improving overall quality of life. And it's no accident that today we're seeing, a lot of infrastructure fiscal initiatives from local policymakers. So, in the U.S., Biden passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. In the EU, the European Commission is focused on building more sustainable infrastructure across its standard EU budget, but also its specific COVID-related regeneration EU package. And the reason why we're seeing this alignment is really, boils down to the fact that policymakers are looking to make up for this, for lost growth during the pandemic. And one of the most efficient ways for the long term to do that is to build infrastructure. Infrastructure has a higher GDP multiplier than spending on other areas that the government may spend on. So we're seeing this strong impetus towards spending on infrastructure and towards doing it with a long-term sustainable angle, trying to achieve those UN SDGs, trying to achieve those net zero targets that we have.
I like what you're saying, Omar, because that means that governments will have a greater impetus to actually use government spending, specifically in infrastructure development going forward. And so the opportunity set for companies that are, prime position to actually take advantage of this makes sense from a medium to long-term investment perspective. Thanks, Omar, for your insights there. Now, again, to show you the practical side of how these thematic investment vehicles are actually constructed. And specifically what your invested RAND would assist in funding, we are joined by Herve Fages, President of Applied Product Technologies at the leading US-based water technologies firm Evoqua. Welcome, Herve.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here.
Excellent. We're happy to have you. Now, if you at home invested 100 Rand in the Smart City Infrastructure ETF, about 1 Rand would be invested in Evoqua. Now, my first question to you, Herve, is what can you do with 1 Rand?
Well, let's start by explaining who we are as a company. Evoqua.
I'm only joking, Herve.
Okay.
I suppose you're not going to be able to do much with 1 Rand. But
well, 1 Rand not, but you start with 1 penny and it drives you to fortune, as they say.
That's the best answer you can give to that facetious question. But in all seriousness, Herve, can you tell us more about Evoqua and what type of business you are involved in?
Yeah, so Evoqua Water Technology is a leading provider in water and wastewater treatment solution. And we offer a wide variety of product portfolio, as well as services to different parts of the market, industrial space, municipality, and recreational customer. We're a US-based company out of Pittsburgh. We operate in 150 locations, 9 countries, but we are serving customer in 131 countries. Mid-cap company traded at the New York Stock Exchange. You can see our financial on the slide. But usually when people ask me, my friend and family, say, well, what do you do every day? And, my answer is we make dirty water clean. And that is what Evoqua do on a daily basis. As you can see on the slide here, on a daily basis, we are treating 378 billion liters of water, make it dirty to become clean in order for us to preserve water and reuse water moving forward. So that is what we do every day. We do direct service to customer. We subcontract or do treatment plan, or managed treatment plan for our customer, or provide a wide variety of product depending where we are around the world.
Now, as you might have seen on the news, Herve, Cape Town a few years ago teetered on the brink of taps running dry. Now, we also currently have one of our largest metropoles currently fast running out of potable water. So the topic is very close to home for most of us dialing in. Now, Herve, I'd be curious to understand how demand for your products are evolving, and specifically what the drivers and opportunities are for your business going forward.
Yeah, so if we want to go to the next slide, excellent. It's two drivers that is driving, the market and driving our company to do better every day. The first one is water scarcity, as you mentioned. South Africa, made the news a couple of years back in Cape Town, and I know it is an ongoing problem. And the second key driver is around, sustainability and ESG, who are driving the water industry. And the key trend you see on the screen here is around, number one, water preservation. If you have water scarcity, you need to preserve water. And that is driving a lot of innovation around AI to monitor wastewater and leaks to be sure that we are not wasting a very precious material like water. The second mega trend that we are seeing is around what we call water reuse. And that is going to be accelerated. It is accelerating as we speak. Something that we on our industry call toilet to tap, which is basically recycling water that is used on everyday life, either or in your home or around industries, to try to recycle water to be going again and be reused. And people ask me a lot of time, they say, well, Herve is water scarcity, but there's plenty of water in the world, we could do more desalination. And what we call desalination or desal is a good technology, and is probably answering part of the problem. The challenge with desalination is it create and use a lot of energy to achieve clean water, is very expensive, and as well is not aligning with ESG goal, when water reuse is really aligning around ESG goal that company need to achieve. The third mega trend that we see and is driving a company like Evoqua, and we have a lot of technology to do that, is what we call treatment of emerging contaminants. Something that is called, PFAS. PFAS is a molecule that you see and that emerge from a Teflon technology that is used on your cooking pan every day. That release some contaminant in the water, and those contaminants are very detrimental to your health. And so there's a lot of push to basically treat that. And, earlier Omar talked about the infrastructure bill in the US. Part of that infrastructure bill, part of it is to address what we call emerging contaminant. How we're going to remove from the water those contaminants that, are detrimental to human being. The fourth kind of mega trend is around real-time water quality management, or what we call smart water. And how do we ensure that as we're doing more and more water reuse, as we are trying to preserve water, we try to drive a more smart management of water. Now, smart management of water equal connectivity, which drives to the next trend, which is cybersecurity. And for those of you who may have followed, we had some challenge in the US at one point where one of our water treatment plant was hacked. And that is basically considered as something that is rising, and the need to protect water treatment plant, because if anyone by accident or with malicious intention were to access those plants, it could create a lot of damage. And the last piece that is emerging, and you're going to see it more and more, we're going to talk about it, is what we call waste to value. It's basically, Omar talked about how much waste each of us are creating every day. How do we treat the waste and try to recycle that waste to create energy? And on the process to do that, you will need water. So as you can see, is a lot of key trends who are driving transformation, who is addressing the mega trend around water scarcity. And Evoqua has a wide portfolio of products to basically address those challenges around water reuse. And we're doing a lot of that on a daily basis around treatment of emerging contaminants and around, everything regarding waste to value. So a lot of change in industry, accelerating very, very fast. For a long time, when we talk about, preserving the planet, it was all around carbon, and that remained a key priority. is now a second priority, which is probably equally as important, is how do we preserve water? Because without water, is no life. And without life, is no reason to exist. So, a lot of transformation there.
Absolutely. And a crucial consideration in public goods sectors, I suppose, is how regulation affects your business. Now, Herve, have you seen a lot of changes in the regulatory space? Specifically, are policymakers globally focused on these global challenges that you mentioned? And if so, how does that affect your business outlook?
So it is a lot of change, and those changes are basically in two directions, which are kind of the same what I mentioned earlier. Water scarcity is forcing government to make decisions and put regulation in place. And you see it in Europe, every time you have some drought, government are taking decisions, reducing consumption and driving consumption reduction, changing the way they price water to be sure that people use less water. So water scarcity is forcing government to make decisions. The second area is ESG or sustainability. And the raising the bar around ESG is forcing publicly traded companies to make decisions. They cannot ignore anymore the challenge of recycling water, and they cannot ignore anymore what we call their handprint and footprint around, what they do. So those regulations are increasing companies to drive down water consumption, increase water reuse, drive what we call zero liquid discharge, so be sure that companies do not discharge in the environment, liquid that are not acceptable. On the municipality side, we see additional regulation to do upgrade. And you mentioned earlier, or, Omar mentioned the infrastructure bill in the US. We see what the UK government is doing in Europe. We see what is happening also in APAC, where, the government are driving an upgrade of infrastructure, upgrade of piping to be sure is no leaking, upgrade of piping to be sure that, we don't have contaminant like lead, and also driving, more regulation around what we mentioned earlier, emerging contaminant like PFAS in the US, or phosphor removal in the UK, and all that. Also, in terms of regulation, we see activity like the COP27 that is driving initiative around net zero that were mentioned earlier. But something that is very new for a lot of us is what we call absolute zero. And we see the difference in Europe, and Europe is leading for that. Europe is driving to an absolute zero, which means zero discharge of anything in the environment, from a carbon perspective, from a water contaminated perspective, etc. While the US and China and India are slightly beyond and driving what we call net zero. So we see those two trends going, following each other. Definitively, the EU space driving and leading around an absolute zero approach, and driving that as a priority. And for a long time, as I mentioned, it was around carbon, but rapidly now, water is part of that transformation. And lastly, around regulation is increasing need around cybersecurity and requirement for real-time monitoring to be sure that is no threats and that is no challenge. And again, all of those spaces, that is what we do at Evoqua. We help company be sure that, number one, they can reduce their footprint impact by, doing water reuse, by ensuring that if they have to discharge water, that water is clean. We also help them around emerging contaminants to be sure that we treat and we help municipality treat emerging contaminants. So as you can see, regulation is happening very fast and is happening sometimes by choice, but sometimes by necessity. And that is what we see. And the increase in water scarcity is going to drive more and more of that.
Yeah, thank you, Herve. And I have one last question, if we can keep it very brief. We're fast running out of time, unfortunately. But what gets you most excited about your future business prospects currently?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to be brief. The couple of areas what is very exciting is the energy transformation. Energy transformation, and we see it with the conflict with Russia and Ukraine driving, energy price up. The drive for new energy is where, get us excited, because you cannot create new energy without water. and that is where we are. So it can be on the space of renewable fuel, where, we can impact and we can help company with wastewater treatment. Is around renewable natural gas, and how do you convert biogas to renewable fuel. Is also around hydrogen, blue hydrogen and green energy, and green hydrogen, where we can, help company. And we have a lot of technology, that help to do that, like something anaerobic digestion that is help on the space of renewable natural gas. The other area where we are very excited is around life science. And we talked earlier about COVID and the impact of COVID. You cannot do anything on the space of life science if you don't have pure water. And that gets us excited. The new emerging treatment for cancer that were mentioned earlier, and that is where we can have an impact. And the last piece is around microelectronics. We see the shortage of chips around the world, and that is where we can help. So there's a lot of space where get us very excited about the future and what we can do, and Evoqua is at the heart of all of that.
Brilliant, and many thanks for your time and insights, Herve. It's greatly appreciated. Water is one of those things that we underappreciate when we have it in abundance, but sorely missed when we don't have access to it. So lastly, I just want us to return to Omar with one final question. Thank you, Herve. I've noticed some index providers have referred to thematic investing as complicating indexation. And oftentimes sort of referred to as chasing styles that today are hot and tomorrow they're not. But how do you at BlackRock see the future prospects for thematic investing as a style? And do you believe it should be part of a well-diversified overall portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it may be slightly more complicated, but I would say that that's because historically indexation has been perhaps overly simplified. So I think, Phoebe from QIAGEN, Herve from Evoqua have illustrated perfectly how thematics, and in this case, healthcare innovation and smart city infrastructure, are aligned to some of the most pressing needs in the world today, from rapid diagnostics to addressing water and resource efficiency, and the strong structural growth prospects for these themes. So I'm a big enthusiast, proponent, and optimist for thematics. I think the only reason we did not invest in this way historically is the lack of data. And now that we have these advanced data sets, we can, on which we base these thematic products, we can, and we also, now that we have these easy to access ETFs, we can invest in the future. And so the future is uncertain. That is the difficulty that we faced as financial professionals. And maybe it feels all the more so today, but we see megatrends as these high probability events in a world of uncertainty. So we think it makes sense to orient diversified portfolios towards these megatrends and towards thematics.
Thanks, Omar, and thank you to our guests, Phoebe Lowe from QIAGEN and Herve Fages from Evoqua. We deeply appreciate your time and insights. We have a few questions. I'm gonna do my best to just briefly get to them. So the first is, two of you asked for us to just repeat those 5 elements we spoke of that BlackRock mentioned as opportunities, thematic opportunities. So the first is climate change and the ever-present issues that faces. The second is changing demographics as populations age. The third is technological advances through breakthroughs. And the fourth is then the shifting of economic powers to the east. And the fifth, the last one, is then the increasing pace of urbanization globally. Now, just a reminder that these trends that BlackRock see as long-term trends that are going to remain with us offer investment opportunities. And the purpose of today's seminar was just to give you a sense of how thematic indexation can offer an investment vehicle to actually allow you to partake in the upside of these almost inevitable trends, if you like. So I want to thank each of our panelists today. We deeply appreciate your time and insights. We know you're busy. And thank you also to you, our valued clients, for joining us today. And again, earning yourself a well-deserved CPD point. Until next time, from Satrix and iShares, we wish you good health and a reminder to stay hydrated, right? So keeping to the topic. If you have any questions on any of the funds that we discussed today, remember that's our Satrix Smart City Infrastructure feeder ETF, as well as our Healthcare Innovation ETF. please feel free to reach out and just get in touch as well. Just lastly as well, so the Satrix Smart City ETF, the IPO launched today. And remember that investors that partake in the IPO will have the benefit of investing in this ETF at listing price. And you then pay zero brokerage or trading fees and experience no bid offer spreads. So this means that it's a near frictionless way of gaining access or exposure to the underlying fund. So we want to encourage you to participate in that. For my panelists, Herve, Phoebe, Omar, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us for, again, another installment of IndexMore. And we will see you next time again. From us at Satrix, goodbye.